Welcome, everyone, to the Real and Lasting Change webinar, Models That Work to End Poverty. We'll give just a few moments for folks to connect to their audio.
Good morning, all.
Good morning. All right, so I am Jennifer Evans, the Associate for Communications and National Partnerships for the Presbyterian Hunger Program. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I reside in Jeffersonville, Indiana, on the traditional and unceded lands of the Osage, Miami, Shawnee, Kaskaskia, Hopewell, and Adena. So I'd like to invite everyone to share where you are, the land acknowledgement, and your pronouns in the chat. And maybe if we can all mute ourselves, that would be helpful as well. And after all of our guests have spoken today, we will invite you to also share your questions in the chat. And then another housekeeping note, this webinar is designed for a faith-rooted discussion of some of the most important matters we face in our world today. We appreciate your help in creating a healthy community space through respectful engagement and understanding of different perspectives. Thank you for joining us in fostering and embodying the just world that we seek together. And so before we get started, maybe we can all just take a deep breath in through the nose and then exhaling through the mouth. Thank you. And I am going to turn it over to my colleague, Alonzo, to introduce our first speaker.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. I am Alonzo Johnson. I am the coordinator of the Presbyterian Committee on the Self-Development of People. I'm excited to be here with you today. My pronouns are he, him, and his. And I am acknowledging the land that we're on. I'm in Louisville, Kentucky. So the land that we're on here, the native lands, before colonizers arrived, is the Shawnee, Cherokee, Osage, Seneca, Iroquois, Miami, Hopewell, and Adena. And again, excited to be with you. Also excited to have our amazing guests with us today as we talk about this really important issue. One is a hero of ours, incredible, amazing anti-poverty crusader. The incredible Reverend Dr. Liz Theoharis is here with us. She's the co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for more revival, with the Reverend Dr. William J. Barber. Second, she's also the director of the Kairos Center for Religious Rights and Social Justice at Union Theological Seminary in New York City. Liz is an ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church USA, teaches at Union Theological Seminary, and has authored incredible books on poverty that we definitely will urge you to grab. One is Always With Us, What Jesus Really Said About the Poor. And another is, and she's the co-author of a book called Revive Us Again, Vision and Action in Moral Organizing. Liz has over 30 years of incredible work and organizing among poor and low-income communities, and with organizations such as National Union of the Homeless, National Welfare Rights Union, the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, the Domestic Workers United, and many more. And we are excited to have the Reverend Dr. Liz Theoharis with us. Liz, welcome. Always an honor to see and hear you and to learn from you. And as we talk about this idea of what does it mean to do this work, and community organizing, policy advocacy, and movement building, folks are really, Liz, what we learned from folks is that they're really trying to figure out how to do this anti-poverty work. and you have been doing this for a long time. I want to open the floor to you to continue to teach us. What are some of the ways that we can be engaging in this work? And we're excited again to have you, and excited to learn some things that will help us be more effective doers of justice and engagers of peace. So, Liz.
Well, thank you so much. It's amazing to be with everybody. And good morning, good afternoon, greetings. As Alonzo said, my name is Reverend Dr. Liz Theoharis, and I have indeed I'm a proud Presbyterian minister, and have been doing grassroots anti-poverty organizing for much of my life. And I think what I was hoping to kind of bring today into the conversation, and then look forward to questions and deeper dialogue, is a couple of key points. One, I believe as a minister, as a biblical scholar, and as an anti-poverty activist, that the problem of poverty in this country and across the world is so great and so vast that it is going to require a social movement to end it. And that when we look at history and when we look at today, great social movements are successful when they're led by those that are most impacted by injustice, and when people of faith are in that movement, roles as moral standard bearers. And I think that's the place that I start from when I do this work, that we need a social movement, and that we need that movement to be led by those that are most impacted. And it needs people of faith from all faiths who see that the real moral issues of our day are issues of justice. I follow and worship a formerly homeless, a low-wage worker who traveled around the countryside setting up free healthcare clinics, never asking a leper to pay a copay. When I look at that Bible from Genesis to Revelation, there is a constant revelation that God requires justice, and that actually if poverty and injustice exist, because we're not living up to what God has asked of us. So as many folks know, and as is in the title of my first book, Always With Us, this most famous biblical quote that us go to, folk here are familiar with when it comes to poverty, is that people will say, well, don't you know that Jesus said, the poor will be with you always. And this does take place. It takes place, in fact, at a Passover Seder, when the people, including Jesus, are in Jerusalem festival, and it takes place over a meal where a woman comes in and anoints Jesus as Christ, as Messiah. It takes place when Jesus's disciples, those most close to him, question, couldn't we have engaged in what most of us are pretty used to in terms of dealing with poverty these days, which is make a lot of money or sell it for a large price and give the profits to the poor, never questioning where poverty comes from in the first place. And in fact, when Jesus says that most famous line, he's quoting, as Walter Brueggemann explains, one of the most radical but unknown parts of the Bible, the Sabbath Jubilee prescriptions in Deuteronomy, where the Bible is very clear that if you pay your workers a living wage, and you forgive and cancel debts, and you lend out money even knowing you might not get paid back, and you kind of put forward just economic practices, then your whole nation will flourish. And that it's only when we refuse to pay people a living wage, when we refuse to cancel debts, it's when we, decide that unjust economic practices where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer are okay, and in fact, somehow condoned by God, that's when the poor will be with us always. And so, from that organizing work that I've been engaged in, I have seen that ending poverty is possible. That's the first point I want folks here to really kind of take in. It is possible. It can be done. Our nation wastes $1 trillion a year because we have kids in poverty. Every dollar invested in ending childhood poverty actually is $7 saved in the future. So we can end poverty. In fact, it's more costly to maintain an economic system where folks are suffering and where kids are going hungry. Then two, it's going to take lifting from everybody rises. This notion that trickle-down economics works, it's not a biblical notion. It's not a Christian notion. It's one where, again, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, not because that's what the Bible says or what God desires. It's because we're not actually doing what God asks. So the second point is that we know what to do. If we invest in programs of social uplift, if we make sure that folk have health care, if we pay workers a living wage, if we protect our democracy, then guess what? The whole society flourishes. But what it's going to take for us to end poverty, because it's possible, and invest in the kinds of things that are going to take, that it's going to take to end poverty, is to build a movement and to build power. Now, I want to say a little bit about power. Today, as folk I'm sure are aware, is the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington. This great mobilization of hundreds of thousands of people for racial and economic justice. It was the March on Washington for jobs and freedom. And, it's most famous for Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. But much of what Dr. King had talked about before he got to that dream was the American nightmare. A nightmare that still exists for 140 million poor and low-income people in this country, 60% of Black people. And that nightmare that still exists today doesn't have to be, but what we have to do is build power. Later in Dr. King's life, when he was building the Poor People's Campaign, he talked about what power means. He said, power for poor people will really mean having the togetherness, the capacity, the aggressiveness, and the assertiveness to make those in power say yes when they may be desirous of saying no. So what we're experiencing right now in these yet to be United States is a lot of no. No, we can't extend a child tax credit. No, we can't raise wages after 13 years and with high inflation. No, we can't, actually make sure that everybody has health care in a nation that spends more money on health care. No, we can't figure out how to, end evictions and foreclosures, even though the solutions are there at hand. And so what Dr. King talks about is from the bottom up, led by the people, bringing people together across all the lines that divide into a powerful force to be reckoned with that can unsettle on a complacent now that has gotten used to racism and poverty, militarism and ecological devastation, and that somehow has distorted a moral narrative away from justice and truth and love and kindness and into extremism and hate and bigotry. But again, if we come together, if we build alliances together, if we organize in our community together, if we advocate for policies together, then we can build the kind of compelling power to turn those no's into yeses. And we can actually build the kind of society that is needed and that God requires of us. And so I look forward to doing that with you all. and us keeping on moving forward together and not one step back, as we say in the Poor People's Campaign.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Liz. Wow, building power, right? This is incredibly profound and just prophetic stuff. Thank you, Liz. This is amazing. And we need to be reminded of that. And as we talk about building power, this is a good segue for our next guest, the illustrious Reverend Jimmie Hawkins, who is a colleague, but also the advocacy director for the Washington Office of Public Witness and Presbyterian Ministry at the United Nations here in the PCUSA. It is lodged within the Compassion, Peace, and Justice Ministries of the Presbyterian Mission Agency. Reverend Hawkins is a longtime ardent advocate and supporter of peace and justice and policy change and transformation. He is also the author of a new book called Unbroken and Unbowed, A History of Black Protest in America. And this book is a compelling and informative chronicling of the history of Black-led protest in America. This book has been making quite the waves around the church. And I know tomorrow in Louisville, here in Louisville, Kentucky, there will be an actual book signing, and Reverend Hawkins will be with us. Unfortunately, Reverend Hawkins did tell us that there will be no merch, so there will be no t-shirts or any of those fun things. But we are excited to have Reverend Hawkins with us, who has been an ardent activist of peace and justice. Jimmie, good to see you. Always good to work with you. Always good to learn from you. And what says you as we talk about this work and how this work should be done? And just as Liz has excited us about policy advocacy and movement building and power and getting power, how do we school us, Brother Jimmie? What do we need to do to address the issues of poverty in our context, and what's important for us to know?
Reverend Dr. Johnson, I've got to admit I've never been given the title illustrious, so I thank you for that. And I did not say there would not be any merch. We're going to give out free hugs to everyone who shows up. So one of the things that I really want to talk about, coming at it from a faith perspective, because I think that is of vital importance, because there are some in our community who are talking out in the world that, one, that the church has no role to play in issues of justice, especially along the lines of politics, and also that the government should not be in this business. And we as people of faith, we know absolutely that that is not true. And so we're called to be advocates. And the work that we do in New York and in DC is on behalf of the church, so that the church's voice can speak out for justice. We try to encourage legislation that's beneficial for men and women, families who are impoverished, and to celebrate the diversity of personalities and identities that we have. And so we're called, you can't read the Bible and not talk about justice. So we're callers for advocacy. And we know that advocacy plays a major role in addressing and eliminating systemic poverty, especially for communities of color and other underserved families that have been particularly hit hard by economic inequality, even in the best of times. And we know that U.S. poverty would be twice as high if it had not been for the advocacy of communities of faith pushing the government to do more. The New Deal, it offered immediate and permanent relief to millions suffering under the economic devastation of the Great Depression. The GI Bill made the receiving of a college education possible and built America's middle class. We know that President Johnson's Great Society helped to create Medicare and Medicaid and the Older Americans Adult Act and other federal education funding. And we know that President Biden's Build Back Better plan is an investment in training initiatives to help millions of Americans to create high quality employment, to expand fields through high quality career and technical education paths. And also the Inflation Reduction Act. We know that it has a focus on climate goals, but also it helps to create good paying jobs. But we also know that despite all of these policies that have been passed, they don't go far enough. And we are in the midst of a time when, even as the economy is improving, inflation is at an all-time low, that millions are struggling. And there much more needs to be done, especially to provide protections for families of color, to ensure that they have full access to available resources without discrimination or bias. So we do advocacy in DC and New York, and there are ways that things that we must advocate for on the national level, the state level, and the local level. We must advocate for local programs that meet the needs of the impoverished, that reduce and eliminate systemic poverty. We encourage you to partner with the Presbyterian Hunger Program and with self-development of people and with the Office of Public Witness and the Presbyterian Ministry of the United Nations as we advocate for federal policies and laws to combat poverty in communities. The Office of Public Witness, in conjunction with the Presbyterian Hunger Program, we recently sent out an action alert on the Farm Bill, and we'll issue one every other week. We will have a Farm Bill webinar in late September. And obviously we know that the Farm Bill deals with many of the safety net programs, especially SNAP, and we know that there's a push in Congress by some right now to reduce those benefits, and we must be advocates to make sure that they are not reduced, but actually increase. We've got to tell Congress to take action on poverty. There needs to be an increase in the federal policy rate, which is inexcusably set at $30,000 for a family of four. Where can you feed a family of four on $30,000? And again, in September, the Farm Bill is up for renewal, and we need to have our voice lifted high and strong to advocate to the Agricultural Committee to support and enhance the safety net programs. Now, as I look across different programs, the Poor People's Campaign, Kairos Institute, the Center for American Progress, there's some consensus on things that we need to advocate for. We need to expand safety net programs so that they benefit all who are in need. We need, as a country, to provide good paying jobs and meet the needs of families. We've got to raise the minimum wage to ensure economic stability for all. And a living wage must be based on the cost of living within that region. We all know that what you need to live in Louisville, Kentucky is not what you need to live in Washington, D.C. or in New York City. We need to provide permanent paid family, as Liz said, and medical leave, and also paid sick days. We need to ensure union representation for all workers who desire it. We need to make permanent increases to the child tax credit and earned income tax credit. We need to support pay equity to make sure that women and men are paid fairly, paid the same. We need to invest in affordable, high-quality child care and early childhood education. We've got to expand our access to health care. We've got to reform the criminal justice system and enact policies that support successful re-entry. We also must invest in affordable, accessible housing. As I travel across the country, that's one of the common issues that everyone talks about, that the housing has become unaffordable and that people are being pushed out of their communities. And we must modernize the Supplemental Security Insurance Program. The Office of Public Witness and Presbyterian Hunger and Self-Development of People are, again, resources for you in your work and as you go forward. And I'm determined that we are going to have our voices to make a difference. There are so many things that you can do in your local community. Write letters to the editors. You have access to your members of your city council. We have a document that we can send to you that's called Holy Discontentment, which talks about congressional advocacy, but also can be applied on the state level and on the local level. How do you set up a meeting with your member of Congress or your state legislators? How do you have a conversation with them? And especially on the follow-up, which is of utmost importance, because once you get your name in their minds, you want to make sure that you keep it there so that when they see an email from you, that they will respond to it. We've got to partner together more as people of faith. Oftentimes we try to do it in isolation, where if we're a member of a congregation, we only look at the Social Justice Committee or Advocacy Committee, but we're surrounded by other Presbyterian churches, and especially by other ecumenical and interfaith community bodies in our neighborhood, which are talking about the same issues that we are talking about. So we've got to make sure that we partner together as people of faith, and also with nonprofits. Nonprofits are a great resource in almost every community. And so as we continue to talk about ways that we can make a difference, again, I want to highlight the work that we do for you in Washington, D.C. and in New York. If you want to come to D.C., we can help set up meetings with members of Congress. If you want to come to New York, we can get you into the UN, because we are, as Presbyterians, we are dedicated to advocacy and making sure that the prophetic voice of the church continues to ring free. And I know my time's almost up, but I do want to say this. I do think that advocacy is growing in the life of the church. Again, as I go around the country, more and more Presbyterians and people of faith are talking about how can I make a difference? And there's no such thing as a little way. Every effort that you put forth. And I think as Liz said also, marginalized, impacted communities need to be at the forefront. And we need to partner with them and understand that impoverished individuals who are suffering, they know what they need. They know what their needs are. And oftentimes we try to speak for them, but we must speak and partner with others. Thank you.
Thank you, Jimmie. Maybe let's all take a deep breath after that. Heavy work we're doing here. So next I have the honor of introducing Denzel Mitchell. Denzel is an associate organizer for Richmonders Involved to Strengthen Our Communities, also known as RISC, which is a faith-based organizing group fighting for racial and economic justice in Richmond, Virginia. Denzel was born in Richmond and raised on the historical northern neck of Virginia. He attended the University of Virginia, where he majored in political and social thought and economics with a minor in history. In his free time, he loves to read, run, and spend time with his friends and family. RISC is also a grant partner of the Presbyterian Hunger Program. And Denzel and I just attended a community organizing training with DART, which was phenomenal. And is grounded in scripture like Micah 6:8. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God? And we learned that we tend to need a little more help with that justice aspect, right? Because these systems are big and they're powerful, and individually, we're not able to hold them accountable. So Denzel, it's good to have you with us, and thank you for sharing what community organizing is and why it's helpful at getting at those root causes and changing systems.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Sorry I'm late. I didn't have internet at my home, so I had to drive to a cafe. So I hope that the background noise isn't disruptive. But yeah, thank you for inviting me today. And I'm going to talk a little bit about organizing, in particular what we do here in Richmond, Virginia. And so first, I just wanted to make a distinction between mobilizing and organizing. And so like many of you, I was involved in the protests of the summer of 2020 after the murder, the execution of George Floyd. And there was a lot of heartbreak because of that, but there was also a lot of excitement because people for the first time were coming out, for the first time in a while, were coming out in large masses in order to fight against injustice, in order to stand up and say that what happened to George Floyd, it would happen to the many other Black men and people who have been brutalized by police is wrong and has been wrong for a long time. And so that's mobilized, where something may occur, an event may occur, and people mobilize around it. And that's why people come out. But also, like many of you, I was frustrated because that work tended not to really continue as strongly as it did during the summer of 2020. And in fact, we've seen a very strong backlash from right-wing evil powers. And so organizing is continuing that work after an event may happen, after people mobilize, following up with the people there, and making sure that for the years to come, there will always be a group, there will always be a system to organize against injustice. And that is what I do as an organizer. I hope people in their communities organize long term and throughout the years. And an example of this that I often tell people about is when you think of Billy Graham, you think of him, whatever your political opinion of him, he was someone who evangelized to the masses. He was someone who got many people to come to Christ at his large crusades. But what some people don't know is that he actually called in a man from a group called the Navigators, which is a ministry, a college ministry at UVA, to do the follow-up to do the discipleship, to do the long-term organizing work of helping people follow Christ, because Billy Graham knew that it took more than just one moment in order to help people in that process. And so, how do we do this in Richmond? If Richmond is involved in our community. As Jennifer referenced, we're part of a larger national organization called the Direct Action Research Training Center. And each one of these affiliates base their work in scripture. And so Micah 6:8, when Micah, after he is finished or coming to the end of condemning the powers of the time for all the injustice they've committed, he says that there is one way in which you can redeem yourself. That is to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with God. And then for the Christian scriptures, for the gospel in Matthew, Jesus at one point is talking to the religious leaders of the time, which were the scribes and the Pharisees, and he says, "Woe to you, for you have tithed mint dealing human, but you have forgot the weightier matters of the law, these being justice and mercy and faith." And so when we look at our congregations, congregations tend to do a really good job with faith, right? With there's worship service every Sunday almost during the year. There's a Bible study as well in many congregations. So they do a good job with faithfulness and help people walk humbly with God. They also do a good job with mercy work. Churches have food pantries and clothing drives and things to help give back to the community. But when it comes to justice seems to be something that is more difficult for churches to do, because justice is not something that you can do alone, as Reverend Hawkins pointed out. And so in biblical times, justice looked like a prophet holding a pharaoh, a king, even a religious leader accountable. And so in today's world, that means holding Congress people accountable, holding our mayors and city council members accountable for the injustice that they perpetuate, or at the very least, they just don't pay attention to. And so the way that we as a group came together back in 2001 was a group of congregations got together and they said they wanted to do justice. Now, they knew they didn't have the money power that usually influences politics today. They didn't have the power to bribe a politician to offer them a campaign donation through money, but they did have people. And so what we do is we organize people power in order to bring about justice in our community. And the way we do this is by each congregation choosing to dedicate the life of their congregation to doing justice. And so leaders in the congregation and clergy people of each congregation get together and they form a justice ministry within their congregation. And sometimes these congregations may already have a social justice ministry where they have a book club dedicated to reading about justice, reading about the issues in the community, which is good. It's not a bad thing. They may even be involved in mobilizing efforts or get out the vote efforts. But when it comes to the work that we come in and help them do, we're helping them to organize long term beyond the election, beyond the newest book that comes out about justice, beyond the one event that may happen that shocks the country. And we've been doing this for 21 years, 22 years. And so after these leaders organize within their congregation and organize their justice ministry, they go through an annual process that we go through year after year. And so first, we start off the year by listening. We have house meetings across our congregations in Richmond. We have almost 100 house meetings across the city, and we hear about what are people concerned about, what are the issues that keep them up at night. And so, for example, way back 12 years ago, people were talking about affordable housing, the fact that they were recognizing that the city of Richmond was changing rapidly, that it was becoming gentrified, and people who were from Richmond were being shoved out into the suburbs, or left to live on the streets. And so because of that, after we have these listening processes, we have a community problems assembly where all the people who are part of the listening process come together and they vote on the issue that we as an organization are going to work on for the year. And so, as I said 12 years ago, that's when we decided to work on affordable housing. And so after we have this community problems assembly, after we're finished listening, we have an intense research process where we look at other cities around the country, see what they have done in order to solve these serious issues. And so one of the things that we know worked based on what other cities were doing was an affordable housing trust fund. And so we pushed for an affordable housing trust, and we were successfully able to get that. So like I said, this work is long-term because even though we got the trust fund, the city decided not to put any money in it. And so during this research process, we are not only meeting with experts to figure out what works in other cities, but we're also meeting with our public officials to make sure that they're keeping their promises and following through. And so this past year, during our research process, we were meeting with council people to make sure that they put money into the affordable housing trust fund, because in the past they have made promises to do so and have not done so. And then after we have this research process, we end our year with a Nehemiah action. And so if you've ever read Nehemiah 5, you know that people usually reference Nehemiah when it comes to a church building project because they want to raise money in order to build up the church the same way Nehemiah was building up the walls around Jerusalem to rebuild the Israelite identity. But when we talk about Nehemiah, we talk about something that many people may not know about that happened when he was rebuilding those walls, which was a famine. And because of that famine, people were starving, people were hungry, and people couldn't pay their taxes. And because of that, they had to take out really large loans. They were taking these loans from loan sharks who were charging interest rates so high that the Israelites even had to sell their children into slavery in order to pay off these loans. And so Nehemiah gets angry about this and he thinks it over. He decides that he's going to hold a big, major assembly where the people who have been affected by these predatory lending practices are going to demand that the money lenders of the time and the tax collectors of the time and the leaders of the time give back what they have taken from them. And he successfully does this. And this is why every year we have a Nehemiah action. And we bring public officials in front of, this past year, 1,200 people in order to get them to make serious commitments to address the problems we have in our community. And because of that, this year we were able to get 4 city council members and eventually the full city council to agree to put $50 million in affordable housing in the city of Richmond, which is tremendous. It's huge. Now we still have some follow-up work because right now the mayor is trying to get rid of the trust fund in its entirety. But like I said, that doesn't mean we stop, because one of the things that we also let our members know is that year after year we may not choose a new issue. May have to focus on the same one. Like I said, we've been working on affordable housing for 12 years. And so that is how we organize power in the city of Richmond. And one challenge I would have for everyone is to, in your local community, look for a local organization. It's important to, of course, be part of national movements and part of voting, because those policies impact us very much. But I would challenge you to look for a local organization like in Lexington and Louisville, Kentucky, for example. There are organizations that do this work that are part of the dark. And so the hope is that as we continue to organize year after year, building up power in our individual congregations, building up power in our individual organizations in each city, that after doing this work, that we will move one step closer year after year to seeing cities that God intended to exist here on earth. Thank you.
Thank you, Denzel. Wow, a lot for us to think about, a lot for us to pray about, and just thank you and Jimmie and Liz for the tactile ways and the theological ways that we can engage this incredibly important issue. And we thank you all for just the ways that you have just learned us today, as the expression goes, and that we are from this, that we will follow up. And as we do, speaking of follow up, I think one of the things that we do is have an opportunity for questions and answers, just as my esteemed colleague Jennifer mentioned earlier. We will encourage you to put your questions in the chat. As you're doing that, I am going to start off with a question, and then we'll go. Then we'll have a question from Matt Bussell. But the first question is, and I'm going to put it in the chat as well to get us started. And that first question is, why are movement building, public policy advocacy, community organizing more effective models than direct relief or other things that sometimes come more easily to congregations and individuals? Why are these models necessary for the addressing of the systemic nature of poverty? And this is an important question because, aren't we doing enough by just feeding folk? Aren't we doing enough just by having food drives? And are we doing enough just having clothes drives? So speak to us. Is that enough?
You want to, in a particular order?
No, whoever is excited enough, and it looks like Reverend Hawkins, you look like you are the one most excited to engage Question.
I know Liz is just chomping on the bit because this is her area right here. But I will say, you know, it's not enough because there are too many hungry people. And one of the things that we as people of faith know that people want to fend for themselves. They want to feed their own children. They want to take care of their own families. And so therefore they deserve a living wage. And people deserve health care, the basic necessities of life. And so I'm one that's, you know, I pastored for 25 consecutive years, and we did a lot of programs, what we call charity today. And I think it makes a difference because, you know, people are hungry right now, but we also know we've got to change the system. The system is unjust. The system intentionally, and this is made relative to trickle down. The flow of wealth at the top will trickle down. It will not. People are selfish. People are greedy. And we have this understanding in this country that businesses are just. And let's just say it, they are not just. And that for-profit motive takes over people's lives. And so, again, we've got to make sure that people can fend for themselves and they have what is required for a life of dignity and a life of self-worth.
So I'm happy to jump in and oh, go ahead. You go. Sorry.
Well, yeah, I would just say I agree. I know that there's one congregation, it's a Presbyterian congregation here, Fruit Shop Presbyterian in Richmond, and they were awarded by the governor for having one of the most effective and largest food pantries during the pandemic. But when we do that work, even if that congregation is feeding 300 people a week, there's thousands of more just in the city of Richmond that are still hungry. And so I would say that obviously doing that work is important. I don't want to discourage anyone from doing mercy work, because I think when you are doing that work, you learn more about what it's like to be and live among people who are marginalized in society. But to echo Reverend Hawkins, there are always going to be many more people who are hungry, always many more people who are suffering because it's a systemic injustice. And the reason that organizing has, you know, is a good way to go, or any of these methods is a good way to go, is because I can guarantee you that there are people every day who are organizing and meeting in order to hurt society just as much, or even more than we're organizing in order to help. And they're trying to make systemic change. There's a lot of money on K Street and lobbying firms because they know that the real area of power, the real place where they can take power, is making systemic change. And so I don't want to discourage anyone, but I definitely want you to be able to think larger about what it means to bring justice here.
I don't have a ton to add. Really appreciate my colleagues. And I think the first thing I want to say is that our congregations, I think, need to be both meeting immediate needs and doing advocacy work. I think too often and organizing work. I think too often, like kind of more community organizing congregations are kind of proud of not doing immediate needs work, and immediate needs congregations are kind of thinking they're doing the real work. And I think both actually are connected to the problem of actually not getting at the root causes of actually poverty and injustice and oppression. And yet I still also do want to add my voice to this choir of, you know, I started doing really grassroots anti-poverty housing organizing amongst homeless and formerly homeless families in Philadelphia at a time where, because of the creative organizing and mobilizing tactics we use, we were able to house, you know, 700 to 1,000 families in a very short period of time. And yet we did a study in that same time that showed that every 30 seconds, someone in Philadelphia was becoming homeless. And at the time that we were organizing, there were more, and this is still true today, there are more empty housing units than there are families that need housing. And in many cities across this country, there's actually 5 abandoned housing units, sometimes luxury housing units, you know, the kind of housing that kind of greets you when you walk in. and starts to play music for you. All right. 5 empty housing units for every unhoused family and person in the country. And so for all of the work we did to open up some more housing for people, because the conditions remained that folks were not being paid enough, that healthcare was too expensive and people were going bankrupt because of it. Childcare was too much money and folks just couldn't afford it. The same conditions exist that many more people over and overfold were becoming homeless. And so it showed to me at that time, and still shows to me today, that we have to get at the root of the problem, that we have to actually build the kind of power and movement building power that it's going to take. But we should never then think that we shouldn't be connected to meeting people's immediate needs, because our scriptures are clear. Give to anyone who asks of you. All right. If you have 2 coats, you should share at least one, right? I mean, so we would do well to follow that instruction at the same time as we're building the conditions to change and to end kind of poverty, completely. And again, it's possible. Sometimes I think our congregations are content doing kind of more immediate service work because we know how to do it. We have the people power, we have the tables, we folks know how to organize those food drives, right? I often feel like if we felt as confident with knowing how to actually build a movement, a 12-step program to community organizing and movement building, that our congregations would be just as comfortable doing that. And I think that's what we gotta aspire to. That's what we have to show is possible and is gonna actually make a difference in people's lives. And again, we've heard examples today of where it is helping, where it is changing lives, where we are winning victories, real victories, where folks, whose lives are a lot better because of the movement building and organizing work folk are doing. And so we surely need to do both. And the last thing, and I know it's gone on for too long already, but if we go back to that always with us passage, what I think is that Jesus is critiquing charity in that passage. He's reminding people that just back then, just like it is today, that folk were making money off of people being poor, kind of a poverty industry, poverty pimps, if you will. In fact, John's gospel of this example, where it's very clear that Judas is the keeper of the money box, and he uses the poor as an excuse to raise money, right? I mean, our Bible is clear about that. And that's true today. People are clear that they're making money off of people being poor. And charity programs often just keep the same dynamic, same power structure, same kind of economic situation going. So I think Jesus is pretty clear about critiquing charity. He is not critiquing meeting people's immediate needs as a means to building a movement, not as an end result.
I just want to add on to that, because and reemphasize that both are necessary, because I work with leaders from many different backgrounds as an organizer. I have leaders who have been in Richmond since the times of segregation. I have leaders who and are Black and suffer because of that segregation. I work with leaders who are white and privileged and may not even be from the city, but moved in and were part of gentrification. And I will say that what keeps people going in this work is the love and the connection they have with those who are suffering, whether it be because they're suffering themselves or because, as Dr. Theoharis pointed out, there are churches who do a really good job of serving those who are suffering, and people have made meaningful connections to that work. And it's really important to have that, because when you're doing this work of mobilizing, organizing, advocacy, public officials are going to give you a hard time. They're not going to Jesus was killed for his work. And so we can expect that as people trying to organize for justice, we're going to experience that or maybe not that intense all the time, but we're going to experience ridicule and people and public officials and people in power not like this. But the one thing that keeps me going and keeps many of the leaders that have done this work for years going is that they love those who are suffering so much that they see no other choice but to organize for justice. And so if you're far removed from society, we have a tendency in society to say, I want to be far removed from poverty. I want to live out in the suburbs. I want to live out in the exurbs. I don't want to be near people who are suffering. I don't want to be near the leper. I don't want to be near the woman who was asking for money. I want her to leave me alone. If that's your mindset, it's going to be much harder to keep going when you're met with compensation, you're met with resistance. But if you are someone who, in addition to organizing, in addition to mobilizing, and someone who identifies with your neighbor who is marginalized, then you will keep going because you see no other choice but to do so.
And Brother Alonzo, I would just add, I agree with everything that's been said. And, you know, charity and advocacy are two sides of the same coin. They go hand in hand. To do one is to do the other. But we all know that in the church, that charity is the low-hanging fruit. It's much easier to do. You get immediate results. It's so gratifying, you know, when you offer someone some food or some clothing. But we also know we've got to encourage congregations to get into this long journey of advocacy. It takes a little longer, but the results are so much more gratifying when you see that people are paid a living wage. And lastly, since everyone brought up Jesus, you know, the Gospels agree that Jesus did three things. He was a preacher, a teacher, and a healer. And I think the church has understood his healing to be charity, but he also was engaged with advocacy. He criticized the religious leaders. He told them, and Brother Mitchell, as you said, Matthew 23:23, he told them, you have neglected the weightier matters of the law. And the first thing he listed was justice.
Man, I don't know about you all, but I am glad that this is being recorded. We're having incredible sermons that are happening, and thank you all for connecting the mercy dimension to justice. Thank you for that. I want to move to Matt's question, and because we're kind of getting low on time, we've got a few questions, but let's move to Matt's, and I'm going to put it in the chat. Matt's question is, what community organizing and advocacy training would you recommend for ministers and congregants who are looking to make a difference in their communities?
Well, I have some pretty concrete opportunities. So if you look up the Direct Action and Research Training Center and you live in one of the communities where we organize, then I would connect with that organization, because every year we have a series of trainings for people, for clergy people and for congregates who want to do the work of organizing. And so the next big training we have coming up is February 6th through 8th in Orlando, Florida, which is a problem for many people, obviously, because of the travel advisory for the state. But we're going to be directly confronting the evil that we see in Florida by having a clergy conference. And we have this every year. And this conference is centered around clergy being prepared to lead their congregation in the organizing work of doing justice. And so the best way to get information about that is to go on our website, to connect with a dark staff person or an organizer from your local organization.
I fully encourage folk to take advantage of the amazing training opportunities that DART offers. I would also invite people, if you're interested, the Cairo Center, we have a new worshiping community that's affiliated with the Presbyterian Church. It's called the Freedom Church of the Poor, and we gather on Sunday evenings at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. It's kind of a spiritual home for activists. Many folks that worship with us and gather with us and organize with us are connected to other congregations as well. And others are, haven't been able to find a church home because they're too tired of poor people being considered sinners and not poverty as a sin. So, but we connected to the Freedom Church of the Poor, and we also have a Spanish language community called Iglesia de Pueblo. We kind of have these different Freedom Church communities, and we have a ministers training program and some other opportunities. So if folk are interested, the Cairo Center does have opportunities for folk to kind of come and learn more and get more involved and in some cases trained up to kind of do this congregational organizing work. I'd also put out a plug that the Poor People's Campaign and National Call for Moral Revival were organized in more than 30 states across the country, and have clergy leaders and faith leaders a part of all of those different coordinating committees. And there are lots of different opportunities to learn about getting involved in movement building and organizing. So if you aren't already connected to a coordinating committee in your community of the Poor People's Campaign and National Call for Moral Revival, it's a way to be connected.
And just last,
And then,
just last, I would say I'm glad my colleagues are here because they really are the experts in this. We offer a little community training, but really nothing to the degree that Sister Liz and Brother Mitchell will offer. So I encourage you to connect with them.
Amen. As time is getting tight, we have one more question and then we're going to close out our hour. We want to be faithful to the hour that we've asked of you. And this comes from Tanya. And this is a good question. And this is the $1 million question. When we see a problem, how do we get started to help? Right? This is the question that we're hearing from congregations. And Tanya has nailed that question. How do we get started? We do pray, we read, and we get into the aspects of justice and Jesus. But what steps can a person who's not in an organized community, what steps can they take? What can they do? Sometimes people feel lost. I'm not connected to any particular communities. I don't have community organizing background. And you're asking me to do this, and the word tells me to do this. So what can they do?
Well, this is my mother, so I'll take the lead on this question. She asked a good question because in my community where I grew up in the northern neck of Virginia, we don't have a community organization like this. And it's very difficult to get one started because organizing work is difficult. So I would say the first thing you need to do is to continue to pray. Continue to pray for the wisdom in order to figure out the ways in which you, with your skills, can help, but also the ways in which you can find other people in your community doing the same work, because you need to do it together. You can't do it individually. And then the next step I would take is to find out what are the problems in your community that you know that people are concerned about, people are suffering from. Sometimes these problems are in plain sight, sometimes they're hidden. It requires you as organizers to do every day, having one-to-one with people, talking to people about the problems they see and how they want to see them fixed. And then the next thing I would do is, especially with DART, we're an organization that if there are a group of clergy in a city and they want to organize around justice, we will come and help start the organization. We have started in the past year or two, I believe 3 or 4 organizations, because groups of clergy have heard about the work and they want to do things in their towns and their cities. And so we are definitely, we are a direct action and research training center. And so we will train you in order to get these organizations up and started in your community. And it may take some time, it may take work, but if you're prayerful, if you are so serious and so connected with the marginalized that you're not willing to give up, you can get it done. And so I would definitely suggest making that initiative to figure out the issues in your community, connecting with clergy people in your community to get things started, and then searching for, if needed, a national network that can help to start maybe a chapter in the community. DART is one of those national networks, but there are many others such as Faith in Action. And I'm not familiar with how the way that the Poor People's Campaign starts up organization. Maybe Dr. Theoharis can speak to that, but I would say start with talking to your community and then find a way to get some help to organize.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have much to add. I love this idea and really believe in it, that we first have to find out what the issues are. I was organizing in Chicago for some time, and at a time when homelessness was kind of on the rise, and there were a bunch of folks that actually were like, oh, what should we do? What should we do? How do we get started? And there were folks that were with kind of a coalition, and they were like, well, we should just have everybody go get on buses and go to the state capitol. But when the kind of local organizers in the area and folks that just had kind of gotten upset by the problems, started to talk to the folks that were living in some of the homeless shelters, they found out that, at 5 a.m, everyone was woken up and had to get in line for 5 sheets of toilet paper. And that was demeaning and dehumanizing. And it was something that people were prepared to organize. And that there was multiple folk that had that resonated with. And they were able to start there, like with the issues that were impacting people, including impacting those at the forefront of the problem. And they were able to kind of build a little coalition and organization around that. And so I feel like, we often feel alone in our communities. We often feel like we're the ones that are able to see the injustice or feel it. And sometimes we are alone. I'm not going to say that I've been to so many, spaces where it's 1 or 2 or 3 of us, right? And love that Bible passage where 2 or 3 gather. Sometimes I wish it was 20 or 30 gathering. Sometimes I wish it was 200 or 300 gathering, but I'm used to 2 or 3. But I think also what happens is when we start talking to folk about what are the issues that people are prepared to do something around, that breaks some of our isolation. That breaks some of our inertia around how do we get started. I think, when we start there, we're able to kind of build up and more. What I found is that when a couple of folk come forward around an issue, then others join in. Especially when it's issues, whether it's police brutality or attacks on our democracy or the lack of health care, especially when it's something that many folk in the community are experiencing. Others kind of come around, and I agree very much with Brother Denzel that praying is happening all alongside and through that, because again, part of the reason that I really believe our congregations have to be doing more Bible study is because if we believe that Jesus and the Bible tell us one thing, and that our justice calling tells us something different, we are never going to go in the direction of justice. But if we, have a chance to really look at Micah 6 and really look at Nehemiah and really look at Ezekiel and really look at Matthew 23 and see that this call for justice is a through line, and that we can't really separate Jesus from justice, then in our justice struggles, we have more victory. And so I do not believe it's a cop-out when our congregations want to study, but have that study be connected to talking to folk in the community. Have that study be connected to, going and having conversations in grocery stores or in healthcare centers or in the Department of Motor Vehicles. I always think that's one of the best places to organize. Got a lot of people that are mad and poor there. And so anyways, I just think talk to people and look at what the Bible really says about what we're supposed to do in the face of injustice.
And we are at our time. So I'm hoping that the questions that were answered were answers for some of the other questions that we didn't get the chance to get to. And so we're excited. Thanking our guests again, Liz, Jimmie, and Denzel, for this amazing hour of learning and this time to be together to think about what does it mean to do justice. And thanking you all for being here. And I'm going to close with this really quick quote from Dr. Y.C. James Yen, a poverty educator. And he says, "Go to the poor, live among the poor, learn from the poor, work with the poor, start with what the poor have and build upon what the poor possess, teach by showing, learn by doing, not a showcase, but a pattern, not odds and ends, but a system, not piecemeal, but integrated, not to conform, but to transform, not relief, but release." People and friends, thank you for this hour together. blessings, and we will see you soon on our next event. And so thank you for being an integral part of this, and we hope that you take these with you. This will be recorded, and if you do have some questions, please get in touch with us. If you have further questions, we'd love to be able to address them. So have a good afternoon, and thank you again for this time to share and learn.